Okay. Yeah, so interesting title. Actually, when Stefan invited me to give a talk here, originally I was thinking about sort of giving your typical, nice thing about startups are all about solving problems and stuff like that, and find a problem and blah, blah, blah. And then I've actually realized that every time I could come not only to Sofia, but every time I talk to entrepreneurs in Slovenia and across the region, there's actually only one topic that always sort of starts to come about. And the topic essentially is, how, in God's name, do I build my product, my company, when I'm being funded, in Sofia or wherever, where essentially my markets are somewhere completely different. So comparing our clients from London, which obviously live in their own market, in a way, entrepreneurs, founders, anyone that wants to internationalize their product is faced with a much more difficult task, right? Starting with obviously the biggest risk that is there out there, which is you start to build something and it's really hard to tell whether actually anyone really wants it, because the market is on the other side of the bloody galaxy, right? Funnily enough, what we realize more and more, time and time again, when I speak to companies that slowly start to make traction, is that there is an even bigger, sort of a more, how do you call it, creepy risk coming into the picture, which is, I've actually gotten some clients, but because I've gotten them at home, who knows how big that can be? Which means we have a lot of companies that reach a certain stage, but because they just started from home, they could never grow, they could never fulfill their full potential as a world-changing business. So instead of me trying to sort of give a very smart advices or being a smartass about how to actually, what are the tips and tricks on how to work, I much rather actually try to sort of help all of us to identify the signs when we are doing those typical mistakes that we see time and time again. And obviously, because I have Tony from Netflix after me, this will be based a little bit on a certain small movie. So your first typical mistake is that your entrepreneur is the local hero. You can recognize local heroes really easily. They're the guys that have an idea, build a product, find the first company, it's Sofia, Ljubljana, Zagreb, doesn't really matter. Typically, maybe a little bit of friendship in between, so it's easier to get the foot into the door. And the fact is, they built their revenues really quickly. Somehow, somewhere, they actually get the funding. But because they feel just so good by being in that market where they've already originated, they'll just stay here, right? Typically, you would find them really, really afraid to make and to move to the next step, to move outside. Because, obviously, that is a great unknown, is the great beyond. The next level, which you see quite a lot of time, is a founder, entrepreneur, who sort of understands the fact that he actually has to observe, he has to follow, he has to check what his customers think about his products, no matter where they are. So you would recognize an observer. Typically, this would be founders that, they would send out surveys to their customers and to their users. And in the surveys, they would ask them, well, what are the features that you think we're missing and stuff like that? Tell us, what should we build? What should we add on, right? And their products, typically, in time, they would just sort of slowly add feature after another, after another, after another, till the end when the product would make no sense at all anymore. Because it would just be a conglomerate of everything, of every feedback they have gotten. The next character, and if any one of you sort of recognizes, this is, by the way, based purely on fictional characters, are the founders that are bold, right? So they understand, okay, we know that there's a market out there, we've done the surveys, but we somehow now start to feel that we actually have to go there, right? So what happens, typically, you have a team of 5, 6, whatever people. 4 of them would be engineers, maybe one marketing guy. And then the founder says, I need to go to London or to Silicon Valley. What happens next? He's unheard of. for the next 2 to 3 months. From time to time, you would hear back feedback on how many great VCs he's met and how many great client talks he's had, but there would be a huge detachment. In a way, he would just separate himself from the team, from the universe that he's actually moving into. And the fact is that while that lonesome cowboy might grow a nice little personal network around, the product typically doesn't follow. And that's obviously a big problem. Then you have the most dangerous guy. So when the emperor wants to conquer the galaxy, what does he do? Does he think about great strategies and stuff like that? No, dudes. He builds a Death Star, right? And you have emperors within startup founders. How do you recognize them? These are the guys that start to talk about brands really quickly, and advertising, and building communities around, and awareness in a way. These are the companies that typically never really launch. Even if you ask them, are you out there? They would say, yeah, almost. We have a beta thing, pilot project here and there, but we're actually polishing it and stuff like that. These guys would spend enormous amount of time and money on building something perfect, and in the end, we know what happened to Death Star, small couple of fighters, very nimble, much faster, just destroyed in an instant. So despite the fact that being an emperor, in a way, makes you feel good about yourself, again, it's really probably not the way to actually make it happen. And then, the last guy is someone who is completely obsessed with exact product he's going to have to do. He actually goes out there, he talks to the customers, he gets the feedback. But whenever a feedback is something that he's not willing to accept, is different to his product vision, sentences like, dude, that's just not our client, starts to enter into the discussion. Or, he doesn't know that space. The VCs, they don't get it. They don't get it yet. It's going to take them a while. Let's just keep on going, keep on going, keep on going. And they push and push and push and push, and obviously in the end, the product bites them in the ass because nobody's actually using it. They just keep on pushing. And then, even more dangerously, they read articles about how entrepreneurship is about tenacity and enduring and persisting, and that is the wreck. It's a direct crash pathway. So instead of doing all this, obviously there are no simple cases on how to do that. But just to be aware that first of all, the first market you actually have to enter with your product has to be the biggest potential market for your product. That doesn't mean that the whole team has to move to, I don't know, States or China or whatever your market is. But that does mean that people who want to validate the product have to be there. They have to live there, right? They have to start to learn not just where their customers are, and how to speak to them in their native language. And that's, a lot of times, it's much harder than you think. And also, you should never be alone in that particular thing. If you send out an important member of your team on your own out there, how does it make him feel? It's risky, it's frustrating, right? It's really hard. And every time something happens, he goes back to wherever, to Sofia, to Ljubljana, everything there just, stalls again, and the company stops growing, and your product does not reach its full potential. Obviously, one last thing, and that's really, really crucial, if you're going to do that, if you will actually move where your customers are, talk to your team. To keep the communication going all the time, every time, to give them direct feedback, to translate the information you've learned from your potential customers so they can put it into actionable, notifications of the product or, different features and stuff like that. That's extremely important. Because working remote is obviously hard on its own. But if you don't keep that communication channel open all the time, then it's practically impossible, right? So that's nice. I'm actually being quite shorter than I thought. Without further ado, the last thing I can say, right, is a wish, for this galaxy actually, not the Force. So I wish to all of you that, may the markets be with you all the time. Thank you.
I think we have time for like a few questions if you want. Yeah, that would be good. if anybody wants to ask a question, do it. Is there a microphone somewhere? You just shout. You know, in the morning we can start with the force with us. And by the way, this is 3D printed Yoda, and I was a really big fan of your talk. So yeah, the Jedi mentality is part of the startup world for sure. So if anybody wants to ask 1 or 2 questions, just raise up your hand and shout. That's fine. And I'm not seeing much, so.
Yeah, it's early.
It's early, you're a bit shy. Shall I ask you a question?
Oh God, am I afraid?
No, it's just, okay, so your advices were brilliant, and thank you for them. So what is the difference between the different empires now in Europe? So are they really like the big Jedis who are the smart ones in London, or like you see this wisdom everywhere now?
No, there's actually, to be honest, there's not a lot of that wisdom around, because the problems that the companies that emerge from here are facing are relatively unique, right? So, you know, typically the big stories you would hear will always be team based in Silicon Valley or a team completely based in London and then slowly starts to move to the States and stuff like that. So it would be very much different. There was only maybe a couple of companies like Prezi, for example, from Hungary that actually has managed to make that sort of a step. And all these companies, up to this point anyway, were actually hugely funded to go through that gap. So it takes time, it takes energy, it takes money to go through there. So, you know, your investors, your team, your bosses, if you're working for a company, have to realize that there are no quick steps. But unless you actually start to learn, then for sure you're on the wrong path and you will never make it.
When I was watching Star Wars, what kind of struck me was, you know, Darth Vader before it became Darth Vader. He was the one. He was like the one that they were like putting most attention to. It is a typical startup story. Like this is the brilliant one. Like it will become big. Yeah. And at some point they're turning to the dark side because they didn't make it big and they kind of feel jealousy or whatever. So what is your advice on that front? That would be, because you know, it's persistence. It's persistence. So you never do it from the first time. But
that's the whole point, right? Think of, what was it, Anakin's, Skywalker before he became Darth Vader as your mobile app, which you really fall in love with, and then it doesn't bring in users, and you say, how could you do that to me? You should be the one, right? And that just doesn't happen. So what's the lesson? If it seriously doesn't happen after you've done a lot of experiments, dude, kill it, because it's going to become Darth Vader, right? And we know what happens to Obi-Wan in the next scene.
Is somebody from the audience became less shy? I can go more in the... Oh, good.
Ooh. We have Okay.
So I come from ERP community. We have developed software that was locally in Macedonia. We had a lot of clients there. Mm-hmm. And the next step is what to do next, in fact. So what's your advice? Since we are locally heroes.
Do you have a product or do you sell a service?
We had a product
Ouch.
for more than 10 years.
Okay.
We had good clients, big ones. So what's the next step? Just to go around in the neighborhood or to do something?
Well, depends on what you want to build, obviously. But if it's about slow growth and being, a lifestyle company, making a nice living and slowly growing, yeah, that's fine. You can check around the neighborhood. You can see where, the hooks are going to be made. We call that the lifestyle way, which is a comfortable, nice, easygoing. Nobody invests in that sort of companies. That's perfectly okay if you take that path. But that does mean on the other side that your product will never reach the potential he actually has or it actually has. So on the other side of that equation, what you do is you try to understand what basic sort of problem you're solving for your customers. And you try to figure out by doing lots of research, traveling around, you try to figure out where is the majority of the companies with that same type of a problem, and are there any obstacles for you to move into that bigger market? Because then if you start in Macedonia and then you slowly expand around, then it's like this. But if you start in Macedonia and you realize that the same problems are applied to, I don't know, to Russia or to UK or to the US, then immediately at that point in time, your company is worth way more. which means you can attract more capital, which means you can afford to do mistakes. Which in lifestyle business, it's really hard. You make, you live out of the money that you make. And that's difficult. It goes out of your salary, right?
Cool. Do you hear me? Yeah. So please give a big round of applause to Jaka.
Thanks, guys.
Jaka is one of the people who really tried Bulgarian startup community to evolve, and he brings a lot of know-how from London.
Thank you.
And we're super happy to have you here, man.
Thanks, Igor.
And I hope you see you around anytime soon. He's rushing for his flight now, right? So
yeah, jumping to the airport.
Sorry about that. It's bad traffic.
Take care.